Tonight, we'll hear a story about a humble man in ancient Israel, seeking guidance in a time of uncertainty. He turns to God with a simple, heartfelt request, hoping for a quiet sign to know that he is not alone. This is the story of Gideon, and the gentle miracle of the fleece that brought him reassurance and peace. Long ago, in the land of Israel, the days moved slowly under an open sky, and the people lived with a quiet heaviness in their hearts. This was the time of the judges, a season when there was no king to lead the nation, and each family did what they believed was right before God. The land itself seemed to breathe with weariness, shaped by years of struggle and waiting, yet still held by a deep and patient hope. As evening settled across the hills, fields of barley and wheat lay still beneath the fading light. Stone paths curved gently between villages, and olive trees stood like silent witnesses to generations that had passed beneath their branches. The air carried the soft scent of earth and grain, and the sounds of the day slowly faded into quiet. Lamps were lit inside modest homes, casting a warm glow that flickered against stone walls. The people of Israel had known fear during these days. For many seasons, the Midianites had come like shadows across the land. They swept through fields and valleys, taking harvests and livestock, leaving little behind. Because of this, families learned to live quietly. They stored grain in hidden places and spoke in lowered voices. They gathered their children close when night fell, listening carefully to the silence around them. Yet even in this troubled time, life continued with gentle rhythms. Women ground grain in the early hours before dawn. Shepherds guided their flocks along familiar paths, always alert but still attentive to the needs of their animals. Elders sat together at the edges of villages, sharing memories of earlier days when the land knew peace. Their voices were calm, though their eyes often drifted toward the horizon. At night, the land rested. The stars spread across the sky like countless points of quiet light, reminding the people of promises spoken long before. The same God who had led their ancestors out of Egypt still watched over them. Though fear lingered, faith had not left them. It rested quietly in prayers whispered in the dark, in songs sung softly to restless children, and in moments of stillness when hearts turned upward. The hills of Israel rose and fell gently, their slopes worn smooth by time. In hidden valleys, threshing floors waited for grain, and wine presses lay ready for use. These places were familiar to the people, part of daily life, yet they also became places of refuge. In their quiet work, the people found a sense of purpose, even when uncertainty pressed close. The night air was cool and steady, carrying the sounds of distant animals and the faint rustle of leaves. There was no rush in these moments. The land itself seemed to pause, as if listening. Though trouble remained, the darkness did not feel empty. It felt watchful, filled with a presence that could not be seen but was deeply felt. Stories were remembered during these hours. Stories of deliverance, of God raising leaders when the people cried out. Names from the past were spoken with reverence, reminders that help had come before and could come again. These memories did not stir excitement or noise. They brought quiet reassurance, like a steady hand resting on a troubled heart. In this stillness, hope took a gentle shape. It was not loud or demanding. It did not arrive with certainty or strength. It lived quietly alongside fear, like a small flame protected from the wind. The people waited, not knowing how help would come, but trusting that God had not forgotten them. Across the land, as homes grew silent and lamps burned low, Israel rested in a fragile calm. The troubles of the day had not disappeared, but they softened in the quiet of night. Above the fields and villages, the sky remained wide and constant, holding the promise that even in weary times, God was near, watching over his people in silence and patience. From within this quiet land lived a man whose name was not yet spoken with honor or strength. He did not stand among warriors or leaders, nor did he seek to be seen. His life unfolded in small, careful movements shaped by duty and restraint. Gideon was his name, a man of gentle spirit, born into the clan of Abiezer, within the tribe of Manasseh. His family was not counted among the great, and he himself believed he held the smallest place among them. Gideon moved through his days with watchful care. Each task he performed was done thoughtfully, as if he weighed every motion before making it. He was not careless or bold by nature. He noticed the quiet details others might overlook, the way the wind bent the grain, the way footsteps sounded too loudly on open ground. Caution guided him, not from weakness, but from an understanding of how easily danger could come. In his heart lived a desire to do what was right before God. This desire did not come from confidence or certainty. It came from reverence and humility. Gideon knew the stories of his people, of how the Lord had delivered Israel in the past. He believed them, yet he struggled to see how such mighty acts could belong to his own days. The distance between those stories and his present life felt wide and heavy. Often, Gideon questioned himself in silence. He wondered whether faith required courage he did not possess. He felt small against the troubles of the land, unsure how someone like him could make any difference at all. These thoughts did not make him bitter. They made him careful, aware of his limits, and mindful of his dependence on God. When Gideon worked, he did so quietly, choosing hidden places whenever possible. He was careful not to draw attention, not out of deceit, but out of necessity. The times demanded vigilance, and he adapted without complaint. His humility shaped his actions, guiding him toward patience rather than pride. Though uncertainty followed him, it did not harden his heart. Gideon remained open to God, even when he did not understand his ways. His prayers were simple and honest, spoken not with expectation, but with hope. He did not demand answers. He waited, trusting that if God wished to speak, he would do so in his own time. In the still moments of the day, Gideon listened. He listened to the land, to the stories passed down through generations, and to the quiet stirrings of his own conscience. He did not see himself as chosen or capable, yet within his humility lived a readiness, a willingness to obey if only he could be sure of the path set before him. So Gideon lived as many did in those days, moving forward without certainty, carrying faith gently rather than boldly. His heart was not loud, but it was sincere. In a land longing for deliverance, his quiet spirit waited, unaware that his life was already being shaped for a purpose far greater than he could imagine. In the quiet turning of Gideon's thoughts, A moment returned to him again and again, not with force, but with a steady calm that lingered like a gentle light. It was the memory of a day unlike any other, when ordinary labor had been touched by something holy. He had not been seeking attention or guidance at that hour. He had been focused only on his work, careful and unseen, intent on preserving what little his family had. While he labored, a presence had drawn near without disturbance. It did not arrive with thunder or command. It came with stillness. An angel of the Lord appeared and stood nearby, resting beneath the oak at Ophrah, a place that had long belonged to his family. The moment had not felt rushed. It felt deliberate and patient, as if time itself had slowed to make room for what was about to be spoken. The voice that addressed him did not accuse or pressure. It spoke with assurance. The words named Gideon as a mighty warrior, not because of what he had done, but because of what God saw within him. These words did not lift Gideon into confidence at once. Instead, they settled gently upon his uncertainty, inviting reflection rather than demanding belief. Gideon had answered honestly, without pretense. He had spoken of his doubts, of the suffering of Israel, of the stories told by their ancestors, and the silence he felt in his own days. He did not hide his questions or soften his fear. He placed them openly before the Lord, trusting that honesty itself was an act of faith. The response he received was calm and unshaken. God did not dismiss Gideon's doubts. He met them with patience. He spoke of presence rather than power, of being with Gideon rather than sending him alone. There was no haste in the words, no sharp edge of command, only reassurance, steady and clear, offering peace where fear had lived. Still uncertain, Gideon asked for understanding, not as a challenge, but as a request born of humility. He prepared an offering, simple and sincere, bringing what he had with care. When the angel touched it with the staff in his hand, fire rose and consumed it, leaving Gideon standing in silence before what he could not explain. Fear came upon him then, not from threat, but from awe. Yet even this was met with kindness. The Lord spoke again, telling him not to fear, assuring him of safety and peace. The moment did not overwhelm him. It grounded him. Gideon built an altar there, naming it "The Lord is Peace," a quiet acknowledgment of what had been given to him. This memory returned now without weight or urgency. It reminded him that God had approached him gently before and would not abandon him to confusion. The call had not demanded immediate strength. It had offered companionship. It had not insisted on certainty. It had invited trust. As Gideon remembered, his heart did not race. It steadied. He did not feel pushed forward. He felt held. The same patience that had marked that first encounter seemed to remain near him still, waiting for him to move when he was ready, to ask when he needed, and to rest in the knowledge that God's nearness did not depend on boldness or perfection. The call had been given in peace, and it remained in peace. Gideon did not yet know how he would respond to all that lay ahead, but he knew this. The God who had spoken to him had done so gently, with understanding, and with a presence that did not fade when questions arose. As the memory of that encounter settled within him, the day slowly gave way to evening. The light softened across the land, and shadows lengthened over the fields. Gideon found himself alone, surrounded by a stillness that seemed deeper than before. The tasks of the day were complete, yet his thoughts continued, moving gently but steadily within him. The sky darkened into shades of blue and deepened further as night took its place. One by one, stars appeared, scattered across the heavens in quiet order. Gideon lifted his eyes and felt the vastness above him, a reminder of how small he was within the world, and yet how carefully known he was by God. The same stars that had watched over his ancestors now shone over him, steady and unchanging. In the silence, the weight of responsibility rested upon his heart. It did not arrive suddenly or forcefully. It settled there gently, like a garment placed across his shoulders. He did not feel crushed by it, but he felt its presence. The thought that he had been chosen stirred both humility and unease within him. Gideon's mind returned to the words spoken to him, words that named him in a way he did not yet recognize in himself. He turned them over slowly, not trying to make sense of them all at once. Each word carried meaning, and each meaning carried consequence. The call before him was not loud, but it was clear enough to be felt in the quiet. The land around him lay at rest. No voices broke the stillness. Even the distant sounds of animals seemed softened by the night air. In this calm, Gideon became aware of his own breathing, steady and measured. The world felt paused, as if allowing him the space to consider what had been entrusted to him. He did not rush toward action. He did not attempt to prove himself or imagine outcomes beyond his reach. Instead, he remained where he was, holding the responsibility with care. He knew the task ahead would require more than strength. It would require trust, obedience, and a willingness to move forward even when certainty was not complete. The stars above continued their silent watch. Their presence did not answer his questions, but it comforted him. They spoke of order, of faithfulness, of a God who remained constant across generations. Gideon felt himself standing between what had been and what was yet to come, uncertain of his place, yet aware that he was not alone. The responsibility he carried did not demand haste. It asked for readiness. It asked for a heart willing to listen. In the stillness of the night, Gideon allowed himself to remain quiet, letting the weight rest where it belonged, trusting that the God who had called him would also guide him, step by step, through what lay ahead. In the quiet that followed, questions rose within Gideon's heart, not sharply, but slowly, like thoughts carried on a soft current. They did not come from rebellion or refusal. They came from an honest awareness of his own limits. He knew himself well enough to recognize fear when it stirred, and it stirred now with a gentle persistence. He thought of his family, of their small standing among the tribes, and of his own place within that household. He remembered the words he had spoken before, how he had named himself as the least, not out of false humility, but from lived experience. These thoughts returned to him now, bringing with them a quiet uncertainty. How could someone so ordinary be entrusted with something so great? The land around him felt vast, and the task before him felt even larger. Gideon did not doubt that God was able. His doubt rested within himself. He wondered whether he had heard correctly, whether he had understood fully, whether his weakness might somehow stand in the way of what God intended to do. Fear moved gently through his thoughts, not as panic, but as caution. It reminded him of the Midianites, of the suffering of the people, of the cost that obedience might require. He imagined the consequences of being wrong, of acting too soon, of leading others into danger. These fears did not drive him away from God. They drew him closer, urging him to seek reassurance rather than rely on assumption. Gideon's humanity showed itself in these moments. He was not hardened or unfeeling. He cared deeply about the people around him and about honoring God rightly. His desire to obey was real, but so was his need to be certain that his steps were guided. The silence of the night did not answer him, yet it did not judge him either. It gave him space to feel what he felt without shame. He did not suppress his doubts. He acknowledged them, holding them carefully, knowing they were part of the path before him. In his heart a quiet prayer formed, not yet spoken aloud, but present all the same. It was a prayer shaped by humility and trust, asking not for power or recognition, but for clarity. He did not ask to be made fearless. He asked to be guided faithfully. The stars above remained steady, offering no sign, yet their constancy reflected something Gideon longed for within himself. He wanted his faith to be steady, rooted not in confidence of self, but in assurance of God's presence. He understood that obedience would require him to move beyond comfort, but he also knew that God had met him gently before. These doubts did not weaken his faith. They revealed its depth. They showed a heart unwilling to act carelessly in matters of great importance. Gideon did not see doubt as failure. He felt it as a reminder of his dependence, a quiet invitation to seek confirmation before stepping forward. As the night continued, his thoughts slowed. The questions did not disappear, but they softened. He rested in the understanding that God was patient, that he did not demand perfection before obedience. Gideon remained where he was, open and listening, aware of his fear, yet still willing to trust that reassurance would come in a way he could understand. In this place between calling and action, Gideon stayed still, carrying both faith and doubt together, waiting not in resistance, but in reverence, trusting that the God who had called him would also meet him in his uncertainty. From within that quiet waiting, a simple thought took shape in Gideon's mind. It was not grand or clever. It did not rise from strategy or strength. It came from what was familiar and close at hand. He considered the ordinary things around him, the tools of daily work, the small elements of life that had always been part of his days. Among these was a fleece of wool, freshly shorn and unremarkable in appearance. It carried no power of its own. It was soft, plain, and humble, shaped by the quiet work of shepherding and care. Gideon looked upon it without expectation, yet something within him settled upon it as a fitting request. It matched the way he felt, simple and uncertain, seeking guidance without presumption. He did not choose something rare or costly. He did not seek a sign that would draw attention or invite wonder from others. This fleece was known to him. He had handled it many times before. Its simplicity brought comfort rather than fear, and its ordinariness felt right for the question resting in his heart. The threshing floor lay nearby, a familiar place shaped by labor and patience. It was open to the sky, smoothed by countless steps and seasons of use. By night, it became a place of quiet exposure, resting beneath the vastness above. Gideon walked there slowly, carrying the fleece with care, his movements unhurried and deliberate. The moon had risen, casting a pale light across the ground. Shadows lay softly around the edges of the floor, and the air was cool and still. No voices stirred the night. No wind disturbed the silence. Gideon felt the calm of the moment settle around him, as if the land itself was waiting. He placed the fleece gently upon the threshing floor. He did not toss it aside or set it down without thought. His hands moved carefully, arranging it where it would rest plainly upon the earth. The act felt personal, almost tender, as though he were placing his question before God without words. For a moment he remained standing there, looking down at the fleece. In its quiet presence, it seemed small against the wide sky. Yet to Gideon it held great meaning. It represented his request for understanding, his hope for reassurance, and his desire to obey without fear of misstep. The night wrapped itself around the scene. Moonlight rested upon the wool, giving it a soft glow against the darker ground. The threshing floor held the stillness, and the stars above remained silent witnesses. Gideon felt no urgency to speak or act further. The placing of the fleece was enough for now. He stepped back slowly, allowing space between himself and what he had set down. He did not linger with expectation of immediate answer. He trusted the moment to stand on its own. His heart felt lighter for having expressed his doubt honestly, not in complaint, but in humility. The fleece remained where he had placed it, untouched and quiet. The ground beneath it was firm, shaped by labor and time. Everything around it rested in peace. Gideon took one last look before turning away, carrying with him a calm acceptance of what he had done. He did not know what the morning would bring. He did not imagine outcomes or signs beyond what he had asked. He simply entrusted the night to God, believing that the one who had called him understood his need for clarity. With that trust, he left the threshing floor as it was, the fleece lying softly under the open sky, waiting in silence. After leaving the threshing floor, Gideon did not retreat from God in silence. The stillness followed him, settling into his heart as he paused beneath the open sky. His thoughts no longer pressed upon him with the same weight. Instead, they gathered gently, shaping themselves into words meant only for God. His prayer rose quietly, formed without ceremony or display. He spoke with respect, careful not to assume or demand. There was no tone of entitlement in his voice. He addressed God with reverence, mindful of who he was and of who God had shown himself to be. The words came slowly, each one chosen with care. Gideon acknowledged his fear without shame. He did not disguise his uncertainty or attempt to sound braver than he felt. He spoke honestly of his need to know that the path before him was truly from God. His prayer was not an argument. It was an offering of his heart, open and unguarded. He asked that God would not be angry with him for seeking reassurance. This request did not come from doubt in God's patience, but from humility. Gideon understood the weight of what he was asking. He approached carefully, trusting that God saw the sincerity beneath his hesitation. As he prayed, the night remained still around him. The air did not shift. No sound interrupted the quiet. This silence did not feel empty. It felt attentive, as though the moment itself was held in care. Gideon felt no rush to finish his words. He allowed pauses to form, letting the stillness speak alongside his prayer. He spoke of the fleece he had placed upon the threshing floor, naming his request plainly. He asked that the fleece alone be wet with dew while the ground around it remained dry. The request was simple and specific, shaped by his desire for clarity rather than spectacle. He trusted God to understand the meaning behind it. Beneath his uncertainty, a quiet trust rested. Gideon did not question God's ability. He questioned his own understanding. His prayer reflected this balance, holding both humility and hope together. He believed that if God wished to confirm his will, he would do so in a way Gideon could recognize. When the words were spoken, Gideon did not wait for an immediate response. He did not linger in expectation or anxiety. He allowed his prayer to stand as it was, complete and sincere. The act of speaking had already brought him peace. He remained for a moment, breathing slowly, feeling the calm settle deeper within him. The stars above continued their silent watch. The land lay unchanged. Yet something within Gideon felt steadier, as though his honesty had aligned his heart more closely with God's presence. With his prayer entrusted to God, Gideon withdrew into the quiet of the night. He carried no certainty yet, but he carried trust. The words he had spoken did not echo back to him. They rested in the stillness, waiting, just as the fleece waited upon the threshing floor, under the same sky, held within the patience of God. The night passed quietly, and the darkness slowly softened at its edges. Long before voices stirred or footsteps crossed the land, a pale light began to rise in the east. Morning approached gently, without urgency, touching the sky with faint color and easing the world awake. The air was cool and calm, carrying the freshness that comes before the day fully begins. Dew formed silently, settling where it would, unseen and unannounced. Fields lay still, their surfaces unchanged, holding the memory of the night without disturbance. The land seemed to breathe slowly, resting between darkness and day. Gideon rose early, his movements careful and restrained. He did not hurry, nor did he delay. His heart felt steady, not because his questions had vanished, but because they had been placed into God's care. He walked toward the threshing floor with quiet steps, the path familiar beneath his feet. As he approached, the light grew clearer. The shapes of the ground and the surrounding space came into focus. Nothing appeared altered at first glance. The threshing floor rested as it had through the night, open and plain beneath the sky. Then Gideon saw the fleece. It lay where he had placed it, unchanged in position, yet marked by something unmistakable. The wool was heavy with moisture. Dew clung to it fully, gathering within its fibers, so abundant that it weighed upon the fleece itself. It glistened softly in the morning light, reflecting the pale sky above. Gideon knelt beside it and reached out with care. His fingers touched the wool, and he felt the coolness of the dew. The fleece was not merely damp. It was saturated. When he lifted it, water pressed out, enough to fill a bowl. The sign was clear, yet it arrived without spectacle, revealed through simple presence rather than display. He looked around him then, letting his eyes move slowly across the threshing floor. The ground beneath and around the fleece was dry. The earth showed no trace of moisture. No dew rested upon it. The contrast was quiet and exact, matching the request he had spoken in the night. There was no sound to mark the moment. No voice spoke from the sky. The morning continued as mornings always did. Yet within that ordinary setting, Gideon recognized the answer he had sought. God had responded, not with force or haste, but with precision and patience. Gideon remained still, holding the fleece for a moment longer. He did not react with sudden confidence or bold declaration. Instead, a calm awareness settled within him. His prayer had been heard. The sign had been given exactly as asked. The simplicity of it deepened its meaning. God had not chosen an overwhelming display. He had chosen a gentle confirmation, one that met Gideon in his humility and spoke directly to his need for reassurance. The quiet nature of the sign reflected the quiet way God had dealt with him from the beginning. Gideon set the fleece down carefully once more. His thoughts did not race ahead. He did not yet move to action. He allowed the moment to rest, honoring it with stillness. Gratitude rose within him, not expressed in words, but felt deeply. The morning light continued to spread across the land. Birds began to stir. The air warmed slightly as the sun climbed higher. Life resumed its gentle rhythm, unaware of what had taken place upon the threshing floor. Gideon stood and looked once more at the dry ground surrounding the fleece. The clarity of the sign remained, steady and unmistakable. Yet even with this confirmation, his heart did not rush forward. He was grateful, but still mindful. The weight of responsibility remained, though it felt more balanced now, held between his uncertainty and God's faithfulness. He carried the memory of what he had seen not as proof to be shown to others, but as reassurance meant for him alone. The dew on the fleece had answered his request, yet it also revealed something deeper. God was willing to meet him where he was, to speak in ways he could receive, and to wait patiently as his trust grew. The threshing floor returned to stillness as Gideon stepped away. The fleece lay quiet again, its purpose fulfilled for the moment. The morning moved on, calm and unremarkable to any passing eye, while within Gideon a gentle certainty began to take root, shaped not by force, but by grace. Though the sign had been given exactly as he had asked, Gideon did not feel rushed into certainty. The clarity he had received brought peace, yet it also stirred a deeper awareness of the path ahead. What God had spoken to his heart carried great weight, and Gideon felt the importance of stepping forward with care. His hesitation returned quietly, not as fear, but as thoughtfulness. He did not question what he had seen. He questioned his own readiness to act upon it. The task before him would affect not only himself, but the people of Israel. Gideon's heart longed to move in obedience, yet he wished to do so with full assurance, knowing that his steps were firmly grounded in God's will. This hesitation did not trouble him as it might have before. It felt different now, calmer and more measured. He understood that God had shown patience with him already. The first sign had not brought rebuke or disappointment. It had brought understanding. Remembering this, Gideon felt free to speak once more, not from doubt, but from reverence. He turned again to prayer, careful in his approach. His words were gentle, shaped by humility and respect. He asked that God would not be angry with him for speaking again. This request reflected his awareness of God's holiness and his own smallness. He did not presume upon the sign already given. He treated it with honor. Gideon asked for a second confirmation, not to test God, but to settle his heart fully. This time, he asked that the sign be reversed. He requested that the fleece remain dry while the ground around it was wet with dew. The request was simple, spoken without demand or challenge. It was offered as a quiet appeal, trusting in God's patience. There was no accusation in his prayer. Gideon did not suggest that God had failed or spoken unclearly. Instead, he acknowledged his own need for reassurance. He wanted to move forward with confidence rooted not in emotion, but in clear understanding. His prayer reflected a desire to obey well, not quickly. As he spoke, Gideon felt no tension in the air. The moment was calm, unmarked by urgency or strain. He sensed that God's presence remained near, just as it had been before. This awareness brought comfort, reminding him that God was not distant or displeased by honest requests made in humility. When Gideon finished speaking, he did not linger with anxious expectation. He trusted that his prayer had been heard. He did not attempt to justify his request or explain it further. He rested in the same quiet trust that had carried him through the night before. The day moved gently toward evening once more. Shadows lengthened, and the land returned to stillness. Gideon's heart felt settled, not because all uncertainty had vanished, but because he had spoken honestly and respectfully before God. The fleece remained where it was, unchanged and quiet. Gideon did not touch it again. He left it upon the threshing floor, entrusting the outcome to God. His role now was not to control or predict, but to wait. This second request did not weaken his faith. It revealed its care and depth. Gideon sought not signs for display, but confirmation for obedience. His calm persistence reflected a heart that wished to honor God fully, even when the way forward required patience. As night returned, Gideon carried no urgency, only readiness. He had asked gently and respectfully. He had placed his need before God without fear. The land grew quiet once more, and Gideon rested within that quiet, trusting that whatever the morning revealed would be enough to guide his next step. The land settled into quiet once again as evening deepened into night. The sounds of the day softened and then faded, leaving behind a calm that felt unbroken and complete. The sky darkened slowly, and the first stars appeared, steady and unhurried in their places. The threshing floor rested beneath the open heavens, unchanged and undisturbed. At its center lay the fleece, simple and still, exactly where it had been left. It held no sign yet, no hint of what the morning would bring. It rested in silence, as though time itself had paused around it. The air was cool and gentle. A faint breeze passed now and then, barely stirring the surface of the ground. The night carried a sense of patience, as if it was content to wait. Nothing pressed forward. Nothing demanded attention. The land seemed to breathe evenly, settled into rest. Dew began to form again, quietly and without sound. It gathered where it would, unseen in the darkness. The process was slow and ordinary, yet within that simplicity rested the space for something meaningful to be revealed. The fleece lay open to the sky, neither protected nor hidden, trusting the night to pass as it would. Above, the stars continued their silent watch. They offered no answers, yet they held a quiet assurance. Their presence spoke of order and faithfulness, of a God who remained constant through every passing hour. The same sky that had witnessed Gideon's prayer now covered the fleece in calm stillness. There was no sense of tension in the night. No expectation weighed heavily upon the land. The moment was free of urgency. Whatever would come with the morning would come in its own time. The night did not hurry it along. The threshing floor, shaped by labor and use, now served a different purpose. It became a place of waiting, of trust laid gently upon the earth. The fleece, ordinary and humble, rested as a silent witness to a heart seeking clarity. Nothing disturbed the stillness. No footsteps crossed the floor. No voices carried across the fields. The night remained whole and undivided, holding both question and answer within its quiet span. This second night did not feel uncertain. It felt settled. The prayer spoken earlier did not echo with doubt. It rested in the patience of God. The fleece lay where it was placed, unchanged, unguarded, and unafraid. The darkness moved slowly, marking the passing of hours without sound. The world remained at rest. In this calm, the space between request and response felt gentle rather than heavy. Trust filled the silence, not as certainty yet, but as readiness to receive whatever would be given. Under the wide sky, the fleece waited. The land waited. The night continued, wrapped in stillness and peace, carrying the quiet confidence that the God who had been near before remained near still. The night loosened its hold slowly, almost without notice. Darkness thinned at the edges, giving way to a faint grey light that spread gently across the sky. Dawn arrived not with brilliance, but with softness, as if the world were waking without wanting to disturb the quiet it had held through the night. The air was cool and fresh. Dew had settled generously during the hours of stillness, clinging to the earth in countless small beads. Fields beyond the threshing floor glistened faintly, their surfaces touched by moisture that reflected the early light. The ground itself seemed renewed, holding the calm of the night within it. Gideon came again to the threshing floor with unhurried steps. There was no tension in his movement, no urgency driving him forward. He approached as one who was ready to see, not as one who demanded an answer. The light was just strong enough now to reveal the shapes of the land clearly. His eyes moved first across the ground. Everywhere around the threshing floor, the earth was wet with dew. The soil held moisture along its surface. Stones darkened with dampness. The marks of the night were visible and consistent, spread evenly across the open space. The dew had not been withheld from the ground. It rested there fully, quietly, as it often did at dawn. Then Gideon looked to the fleece. It lay exactly where it had been left, unchanged in form and place. Yet there was a clear difference. The fleece remained dry. Its wool showed no sign of moisture. It did not glisten in the light. It did not carry the weight of dew. It rested apart from the dampness that covered everything else. Gideon drew closer and knelt beside it. He reached out carefully, touching the fleece with his hand. The wool was dry beneath his fingers. There was no coolness, no trace of moisture hidden within it. The contrast between the fleece and the surrounding ground was complete and unmistakable. He paused there, taking in the stillness of the moment. The sign stood exactly as he had asked, clear yet quiet, precise yet gentle. God had answered again, not with noise or display, but with calm certainty. The meaning did not rush into Gideon's thoughts. It settled. There was no need to interpret or question what he saw. The request had been specific, and the response matched it perfectly. The fleece was dry. The ground was wet. Nothing more needed to be added. The morning continued to unfold naturally around him. Light grew warmer. The air shifted slightly as the day began its slow advance. Yet Gideon remained still, letting the confirmation rest upon him without hurry. This second sign did not overwhelm him. It steadied him. It carried a quiet assurance that reached deeper than the first. God had not only answered once. He had answered again, meeting Gideon's hesitation with patience and care. There was no sense of rebuke in what Gideon saw, no indication that his request had tested God's kindness. Instead, the sign reflected God's willingness to guide him gently, step by step, according to his need. The clarity given was not meant to impress others. It was meant to strengthen the one who had asked. Gideon did not speak. There were no words that needed to be formed. His response was inward, shaped by understanding rather than expression. The certainty he sought had been given, not to remove all fear, but to anchor his trust. He rose slowly from the ground, leaving the fleece as it was. Its dryness against the dew-soaked earth remained as quiet testimony to what had taken place. Gideon did not gather it up or examine it further. The sign had served its purpose. The land around him stirred gently with the beginning of the day. Life resumed its familiar rhythm. Yet within Gideon something had shifted. The uncertainty that once pressed heavily now felt ordered and contained. He did not feel suddenly strong. He felt assured that God was present and attentive. The second sign had been fulfilled without excess or delay. It stood as a confirmation shaped by patience and grace. The same God who had spoken to Gideon before had now confirmed his will clearly, allowing Gideon to move forward not driven by fear, but supported by trust. The threshing floor remained quiet as Gideon stepped away. The dew continued to rest upon the ground. The fleece remained dry. And within that calm contrast, God's nearness had been revealed with gentle certainty. The clarity of what Gideon had seen settled quietly within him. It did not arrive with a surge of emotion or sudden confidence. Instead, it brought a steady calm that spread through his thoughts and eased the tension he had carried. The questions that once circled his heart no longer pressed for answers. They rested, having been met with care. Gideon stood in the soft light of the morning, breathing evenly, aware of the stillness within himself. The fear that had lingered did not vanish completely, but it loosened its hold. It no longer shaped his thoughts or guided his steps. In its place grew a sense of trust, formed not by effort, but by reassurance given at the right time. He understood now that God had not hurried him. The signs had not been meant to force belief or compel action through pressure. They had been given to strengthen his heart, to guide him gently toward readiness. This understanding brought peace. Gideon did not feel pushed forward. He felt invited. The memory of his doubts no longer brought discomfort. Instead, it reminded him of the patience he had been shown. God had met him where he was, without expectation of strength beyond what he could give. This realization softened Gideon's spirit further. He no longer measured himself against the task ahead. He measured himself against the faithfulness of God. His trust grew quietly. It was not marked by bold words or outward signs. It lived in his willingness to accept what had been revealed. The calm within him was not born of certainty about every step that lay ahead. It came from confidence in the one who would walk with him through each step. Gideon felt grounded, as though his feet stood more firmly upon the earth. The responsibility he carried still remained, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt balanced, supported by the assurance that he was not acting alone. God's presence, once felt as a distant hope, now felt near and attentive. The morning continued to unfold around him, unchanged by what had taken place. Yet Gideon moved within it differently. His thoughts were clear, not because all questions were answered, but because he trusted that answers would come when needed. He did not need to see the entire path. He only needed to take the next step in faith. This acceptance did not remove humility from his heart. Gideon still knew his own limitations. He still recognized his smallness, but these qualities no longer unsettled him. They became part of the way he depended upon God rather than reasons to doubt himself. He allowed the moment to remain as it was, without seeking further confirmation or explanation. The signs had been sufficient. They had done their work quietly and completely. Gideon's role now was to receive what had been given and to carry it forward with obedience shaped by trust. The threshing floor, the fleece, and the dew faded into the background as Gideon turned his attention inward. The assurance he carried did not need constant reminder. It rested securely within him, steady and calm. In this quiet resolve, Gideon felt ready, not because fear had been erased, but because it no longer ruled his heart. Trust had taken its place, growing gently, supported by the kindness and patience of God, who had guided him step by step into acceptance. The calm that settled within Gideon did not fade. It rested quietly in his chest, steady and untroubled, as though his heart had learned a slower rhythm. Nothing more was asked of him in that moment. There was only the gentle awareness that God had been present, attentive and kind, meeting uncertainty with patience rather than urgency. In the silence that followed, faith no longer felt like a heavy demand. It became something lighter, something that could be carried without strain. Gideon's questions were not dismissed or corrected harshly. They were answered softly, in a way that allowed trust to grow naturally, without fear. What once trembled now stood calmly, not because doubt vanished, but because reassurance had been given room to settle. This moment reflects a deeper truth about the way God works with fragile hearts. Faith is often formed slowly, shaped in quiet spaces where fear is acknowledged and met with mercy. There is no rushing, no shaming, only steady guidance and gentle confirmation. Patience becomes sacred when it is held in such care. The same kindness still extends into moments of uncertainty now. When confidence wavers and answers seem distant, there is still a nearness that does not withdraw. God remains close, offering peace that does not demand perfection, only openness. Trust grows not through force, but through being met again and again with compassion. Allow this peaceful assurance to continue to settle, softening thoughts and easing the body into rest. Let the quiet remain, wrapping the mind in calm and the heart in safety. If these gentle Bible stories bring comfort and peace, you are warmly invited to subscribe, to share them with others who seek rest, and to remain here, where faith is steady and sleep may come softly.